We're going to do a quick mic check just to make sure this is working, and then I'm going to get right to it. Wow, what an amazing, amazing fight. I mean, whose heart is not racing after seeing a fight like that? Hold on, just making sure that this is right on. All right, are we on? Just making sure that mic check is on. Mic check is on. All right, so that confirms it. So, guys, usually I would have something prepared for every single podcast. I would know what to say. I would come out guns blazing straight away, just having something to say in the most epic proportion, in ways that I'm basically trying to entice your dopamine. That's literally my goal in every single podcast, right? Right now, I'm literally in lost of words of what I'm supposed to say because let's face it, this is one of the greatest knockouts to have ever happened in the history of mixed martial arts, if not the entire combat sports world. Now, what exactly do I compare this to? Well, I can tell you the way that I compare this is literally in the same light as Muhammad Ali defeating Joe Frazier in Thrilla in Manila because he lost to him in the first time in New York, and in the same similar fashion as when Muhammad Ali defeated George Foreman in Rumble in the Jungle. Now, why do I compare that? Because number one, it was the rope-a-dope that he lured Pereira in. Whereas with, let's say, in the likes of the Joe Frazier fight, he had to fight him multiple times. Well, not multiple times, but twice in order for him to get that back. And here he is. He was able to defeat Adesanya for the second time around, right? And then he was able to come back and fight him in kickboxing and then fight him in MMA. And then here we are. He gets him back. It almost seems like this is the only win that Adesanya was able to get out of Alex Pereira. But again, what he was saying all throughout the entire fight week was that, hey, you know what? I don't something about like I don't settle scores, or I don't keep scores, I settle them. Well, that's exactly what he did. He literally settled the score tonight in ways that was just absolutely epic. Now imagine if this is the best way I can really describe it, right? Have you guys ever played GTA Online where, let's say, like a player on the other end is killing you maybe 5 times or 6 times, and then that one time, just that one time, you get that sniper shot off of him, or that kill, or that explosion, or whatever it is that you are able to do in GTA to take out your opponent. You got that one, because you know how they keep scores on GTA, right? Well, literally, that's what Adesanya did. He took the last sniper shot or the last kill towards Alex Pereira and then was like, I'm out of the game. And that's what you do. You get out of the server, or you turn off the game, you turn off the online mode, and then you're back right on doing whatever. That's literally what happened tonight. So it was the most surprising fight that I have ever witnessed in my entire life. And you can't deny the spectacular ending of this, because the way that the fight had started, Israel Adesanya was investing a lot of the leg kicks going into it. He was hitting him with calf kicks and constantly doing it. And of course, Alex Pereira was standing up very straight. If you noticed in the commentary, DC had mentioned something to the effect that, man, this guy is over here standing up really straight, just covering space all throughout the entire octagon, intimidating you. Well, Israel Adesanya didn't feel that intimidation for the simple fact that he was already in the cage with this guy several times, or not just in the cage, but in the ring as well. He was able to fight him and read him and understand him and study him. This is literally the fourth fight that they've been in, right? Because they did 2 kickboxing fights, of which Israel Adesanya lost by a decision. The second time around, he was beating him up until he got knocked out. And in the third fight, they went on to fight in kickboxing, only for Adesanya to lose and then come back to MMA, and had this situation where, how do I explain this, right? Like, it was like the competitive nature of Alex Pereira when he saw Israel Adesanya become this superstar. He said to himself, you know what? I'm going to go after this guy because I beat him. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the guys that you know in high school, right? Let's say if you were the guy that, got bullied in school, or you were the guy that was the nerd, and then there was these jocks or whatever, and then all of a sudden you become this billionaire tech guy or this successful person to whatever degree, right? And all of a sudden, this guy who didn't make it the way that you did has this animosity towards you, right? So he's like, you know what? I can do something way better than this guy. I could do things way better than this guy. I could do this and that. It kind of reminds me of the Cobra Kai, Daniel LaRusso, Johnny Lawrence story. If you remember, if you watched the first season of Cobra Kai, Johnny Lawrence was a bum, for lack of a better term, in comparison to Daniel LaRusso, who became this successful car dealership owner. But somewhere along the lines, Johnny Lawrence decided he was going to go and start up his karate dojo and bring back Cobra Kai. And then all of a sudden, there's some success and some traction to it. What does Daniel LaRusso do? He decides he wants to go and open up Miyagi-Do. But not only that, he wants to do it for free. This is what this story reminds me of. It's trying to one-up your opponent or your former rival and continuing that rivalry up until the end. And that's literally what we saw tonight. It was one of the most epic scenes that I have ever seen. And then on top of that, how about the fact that Donald Trump was in the crowds during the night, right? I mean, how amazing is that? Because regardless of your political affiliations, there's something epic to that. Not everybody can be a U.S. president. Not everybody can be Donald Trump. And for Donald Trump to endorse the sport in this kind of way, I think just made everything bigger. Look, here's another thing that I think is really worth important mentioning, right? I have a lot of friends that are in the boxing media business that are covering Shakur Stevenson tonight. There was Jared Anderson, all these other guys. Basically, what I told them was something to the effect was, you guys are watching pro wrestling tonight because you know what? If you look at my prediction on this particular channel, I literally got every single fight wrong. Not almost every single fight. Most of the fights I got wrong. And I love it. I absolutely love it because you know what? Here's the thing. As a Muslim, I'm not a gambling man. So I don't go out and invest in gambling or anything like that. I just watch the sport for the simple fact that it motivates me to train. It's a sport that I've been around for one form or another all my life. So I just have a certain passion for it. So there's no stake in it in terms of, well, I'm going to have to win this, or I got to get this right, or this and that. No, I just look at these fights and say to myself, well, this is the trajectory of what's going on, and I think this guy is going to win for this reason and this and that. And that's all that I really try to do about that, right? I don't have this James Krause ambitions of trying to gamble my way or trying to use this as some means of trying to make money or anything like that. Because you know why? Here's the thing. Maybe you can do that in boxing, but then, if you're really going to look at the odds, how much money are you really going to make out of a Shakur Stevenson fight? But in comparison to tonight, you had, let's say, Rahul Rojas. He loses by a decision, gets exposed, and gets his first loss. I mean, he's an 18-year-old kid coming in here fighting grown men in one of the highest professional sports settings in prize fighting, and gets exposed in different kinds of ways. But we didn't think that that was going to happen because, let's face it, we had all the hype that was going on with him. We thought that he was going to be this next phenom, this next Vitor Belfort. If you guys remember Vitor Belfort when he was 19 years old, beating up Vanderlei Silva during the bare knuckle days of the UFC. And then you had Kevin Holland beating Ponzinibbio. That wasn't much of a surprise. Now, how about the knockout of Rob Font and Adrian Yanez? That was a surprise. I really thought Adrian Yanez was going to be that guy that was going to rise to the top. Gilbert Burns and Jorge Masvidal, not much of a surprise. Not much of a surprise at all, considering the fact that, let's face it, we know the skills of Gilbert Burns in comparison to Jorge Masvidal. But Jorge Masvidal went out like a G, exactly the way that we had predicted he was going to be out of there. Because, let's face it, we knew that he wasn't going to get knocked out. We knew that he wasn't going to get finished, although you never know, right? I mean, it is Gilbert Burns, but he went out with not getting knocked out or not getting finished and then fought in front of Donald Trump. So that wasn't much of a surprise. The other surprises in the card was just way early in the card. For example, Jacqueline Amorian. I didn't think that Jacqueline was going to lose this fight simply because she had all these first round finishes, especially done by a submission. So I'm thinking, this is not going to happen. There's no way that she's going to lose this fight, right? Okay, lo and behold, the first round ends, and I'm thinking, okay, you know what? She's going to sink in a first round submission. She had the rear naked choke so closely right in, and I'm thinking, this is going to be a finish. This is going to be a sure deal. Not so fast. Sam Hughes was like, let me show you what I've learned throughout my 13 some odd fights in my entire career. Okay, plus maybe amateurs or some other combat sports that she's been in. And then you had Steve Garcia, who I would have never expected to have knocked out Shah Ilian. But let's be honest, Steve Garcia trains with the likes of Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn and John Jones and all those guys in New Mexico. So it wasn't really that far off that he was going to be able to do that. Devastating knockout. And then, of course, Ignacio Bahamondes was able to score a decision over Trey Ognon. He had great switch stances, which really surprised and confused the hell out of Trey, and rode himself out to a decision. Was able to get a 49% striking percentage through about 200 strikes out of the 99 that he was able to land, and moves on to get a decision. And then you had Michelle Watterson, which I really thought was going to win the fight, but again, it was a close split decision. And then here is Chris Curtis, who we thought was going to win, but Kelvin Gastelum proved why he was a former title contender. And not only that, I mean, he's still young in his career and was still able to pull off what he did with the great footwork that he was able to do. Just like what I had mentioned, I picked Chris Curtis to win this one. But in reality, Kelvin Gastelum showed the skills that he's always been able to have. And then, of course, Cynthia Calvillo losing by decision. That one I got correct. Joe Pfeiffer getting a knockout against Gerald Mershad. That one I got correct. But everything else was a surprise. And then, of course, they had Carl Williams canceling the fight against Chase Sherman, which, by the way, kind of delayed the card for another 30 minutes. And that was literally the entire card in a nutshell. So you got to ask yourself, right? That is one of the greatest things about mixed martial arts in total, is that it's the theater of the unknown. Even though I got a lot of the predictions wrong in this fight, I really enjoyed watching it because, once again, like I said, I'm not about trying to have stakes in this particular prediction or anything. I just do these predictions because, you know what? I'm going to break these fights down. I'm going to tell you what I think, and I'm going to see what happens. And the truth of the matter is that when you're dealing with a sport like this and one of the most exciting sports in the world, you're just never going to know what you're going to expect. And not only you're not going to know what to expect, you're just not going to know who is going to be the winner and who's going to be the loser, because the sport has so much dynamics that goes along with it. Okay, there's kicks and punches, there's takedowns, and then there's all these situations in between. So we knew how competitive Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira were. They were always competitive with each other, especially on the striking department. Now, in the first MMA fight that they did in the UFC for the world title, it was a whole different dynamic that was involved, because there was grappling involved, to which may have tired out Alex Pereira in ways that he just wasn't prepared for in a mixed martial arts championship setting, right? Because he could have boxed and kickboxed for 25 minutes straight, for maybe even 36 minutes straight in a boxing setting. But when you add grappling and clinching and all these other factors in between in the ground game, it's just a whole different ball game. And I think that it showed in that first fight, but then again, he was able to show also why he was dangerous. Look, in all honesty, Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira are one of the greatest rivalries to have ever existed in all of sport. I'm going to tell you why. I want you to think about this in a proper perspective, right? This is like a movie, the way that they set up Alex Pereira. It was obvious that Israel Adesanya had gone through the gauntlet of all the different fighters that they have pretty much faced, right, in terms of the different styles. He faced the likes of Brunson. He faced the likes of Wilkinson. He faced the likes of Marvin Vettori. He faced the likes of Jared Cannonier. He faced the likes of Yoel Romero, who is a wrestler but doesn't really use a lot of wrestling, so make of that as you will. Whereas with Alex Pereira, he just went through all these guys with people that were just basically a bunch of nobodies, but at the same time, he went through a bunch of guys that just really didn't have the full set of mixed martial arts skills that they could implement to really cause a dangerous fight against him, but played to his advantages, just like what he did with the Sean Strickland fight, right? Sean Strickland should have gone in there and tried to out-wrestle Alex Pereira, but what does he do? He goes and tries to bang with one of the best bangers in the entire sport of MMA, because he was a double champion in kickboxing in Alex Pereira. So they basically set up Alex Pereira to be in this fight, to which it was an absolute epic proportion of a story. Here's this flamboyant top superstar in Israel Adesanya, a guy who has all these different multiple layers about him. For one, the guy grew up in New Zealand, but was born in Nigeria. Yet he has this swag about him like he's from New York. And by the way, if you guys are watching the ESPN post show right now, he's literally in some sort of stage right now in Miami looking over some bridge, and it just looked like the most epic scene ever. He's talking to all the ESPN analyst guys. And the way that he looks right now, he looks vindicated. He looks happy, but at the same time, he also looks very angry, because did you guys see his post-fight speech? It was like a slap in the face to a lot of people that don't believe in you, and I think that's one of the most important things to really understand about this story. But more on Jorge Masvidal in a second, but just a little bit on Israel Adesanya. I think that Israel Adesanya has a lot of insecurities about him. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, why am I saying that one of the top fighters in the world has insecurities about him? Well, guess what? Mike Tyson said in a recent interview or some sort, where he was basically asked about the Caleb Plant, David Benavidez boxing match, who do you think is going to win? He said, well, I'm going to go with David Benavidez because I'm always going to go with David Benavidez. He's the best in the world, and even if he loses, I'm still going to go with him. And he said something to the effect that he thinks that David Benavidez is going to be one of the best fighters in the world because he's insecure. And he said that insecure guys are one of the best fighters there is. Now, why would he say that? He said because David Benavidez, the boxer, used to be a fat kid and he has something to prove to the world. Well, you look at Israel Adesanya's story. He's got a lot to prove, right? He's this immigrant that was from Nigeria moving into New Zealand. You got to imagine the type of discrimination that he may have faced growing up there. And not to mention the fact that he has all these stories about how he says that he keeps the old bullies that he knew in school in his social media page just so he can keep track of how bad they are doing in his life. So you got to understand, there's a lot of spite in that energy. There's a lot of grit and determination and wanting to prove people wrong. And for those of you that have never been an underdog in your life, you're never going to understand that. If you're that guy that was always the stud quarterback in your high school football team, or the guy that was always in shape, or the guy that was always the top guy in your school, or the popular kids, or this and that, I'm sorry to tell you, this is just not something you're going to relate to. You're just going to look at this in a sense of like, well, he's got a chip on his shoulder. Who hurt you? Who hurt you, or this and that. They love to say that. But the thing is, you're just never going to understand that. There is a reason why people on this earth are oppressed in the way that they do, because you know what, in every single story, wherever there are Israelites that were with Moses, there's always going to be the powerful Egyptian pharaohs that are going to hold them down. Just like with everything in history, there's always going to be that. Just like with the Romans, the way that they went and persecuted Isa alayhi salam and Jesus Christ and his companions. Just like the Meccans did with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. These are things that most people are just never going to understand. They're never going to understand that dynamic. But when you're somebody like Israel Adesanya, he understands that dynamic very well. And not only did he understand that dynamic very well, he also used it as a way to propel him to greatness. Because you can't deny what you saw tonight was one of the greatest things that you will ever witness in combat sports. And I know every single week the fights keep getting better. They keep getting good. And then you keep saying to yourself, you know what, man? Every fight just becomes like this epic proportion every single card, even if it was just a regular fight night. But this one in particular really hits home for a lot of people that want to prove something wrong to someone. And just like the picture that you're seeing right now, you know what he's doing? He's just about to lay down the hammer fist on Alex Pereira as just a proving point to say, like, you know what? This is what you get for never believing in me. This is what you get for thinking that I was never going to make it, that I was never going to be good enough. But in the end, I'm the one that came out on top. And my God, there is nothing more beautiful than Israel Adesanya being able to prove that to the world. And by the way, if you guys are watching this right now, please follow and like the conference call. We are a growing mixed martial arts channel that's trying to do exactly what Israel Adesanya is doing, and that's just trying to make it, trying to be the top dog of the business. And by the way, to all my Muslim brothers out there, shout outs for a great Ramadan. We've got a few weeks left, just not even a few weeks, maybe a couple of weeks left, and then it's Eid, and the time is just going by so quickly like that. To all the struggles that we're going through in Ramadan and everything else, this is a great story for Israel Adesanya. Now, what's going to happen after this? Who knows? Is he going to fight Khamzat? Is he going to fight Robert Whittaker again? Highly unlikely. Is he going to move up a weight class? Maybe he's going to go and fight John Jones somewhere down the line. Who knows? But whatever is going to happen in the future, it really doesn't matter, because tonight, what had happened is epic enough to where you have to really seize this moment, really enjoy this moment in the way that you will never experience it for a long time. I mean, in combat sports, exciting things happen all the time, right? We saw it with Leon Edwards when he shocked the world. We saw it with Chris Weidman when he was able to beat Anderson Silva. But This right here, I think, is a little bit different because of the fact that he fought Alex Pereira so many times. Now, I'm going to jump around a little bit. Let's go to Jorge Masvidal, right? With Jorge Masvidal, the story here is a little bit different, right? It's one of those stories that's very common in combat sports, which is the fact that it's never going to end the way that you want it to end. A lot of the guys that end their careers here in mixed martial arts and boxing and everything else, it ends with them being on their back and beaten and losing the last fight that they had and then having the sport to retire them instead of them retiring from the sport in the way that Khabib, Joe Calzaghe, Andre Ward, and Rocky Marciano and Floyd Mayweather did. That's just not something that you're going to end. George St. Pierre, by the way, shout out to him because he was in the crowd tonight. So that's the reality of this sport in and of itself, right? And you guys have to understand that. It's not pretty. And at the same time, you really have to go out with your head held high in ways of understanding that, you know what? It's not always going to go your way, but there's always a moral victory that you can look to. And what is the moral victory that Jorge Masvidal can look to in this aspect? Well, the one moral victory that he can look to is say to himself, you know what? I didn't get finished. I didn't get knocked out. I came out here and did my best, and then I fought in front of the president. So that may be good enough. But there are people out there that have different ambitions, have different ways of looking at the fight game, have different ways of interpreting what is good or what is great. But ultimately, you have to understand these fighters, they don't fight for you. They fight for themselves. They don't fight for your opinion. Yes, it's great that you support them. It's great if you're down with them. It's great if you are praiseworthy of their performances. But even if you're not, a lot of these guys are just doing it for themselves. Yes, there is an aspect of prize fighting where they have to provide and make money for their family. That's true. All that is a fact. But the reality is that a lot of these guys are only doing it for themselves and not you. So the sooner that you understand that, the sooner that you can really curb a lot of the criticisms that you have, especially with the criticisms that they're going to have for Rojas Jr. And you got to think the kid is 18 years old. How many 18-year-olds are out there competing in the highest competitive level of sport in the way that he is right now? Not a lot of kids are doing that right now. And by the way, he didn't really look too bad. I mean, yes, he made a lot of mistakes. He got mounted. He got nearly choked. He nearly choked the other guy. He was pushing such a high pace in the beginning of the fight that he was just not able to sustain it later on, and then it just became a detriment against him. But nonetheless, as great of a memory as this also could just be a figment of a memory to Rojas in the greatness that he may experience later on. Same thing with Yanez, right? I mean, what a great brawl that Yanez and Rob Font had going on. I mean, they were going back and forth. They were hitting each other with some hooks and some jabs. But in the end, Rob Font just was able to knock Adrian out and was able to finish him. What else happened? So with Rob Font, he's got the most knockouts right now in the UFC. One of the most knockouts in UFC Bantam history, right? There's 7 for TJ. There's 6 for him. So he's up there. He needs just a couple more knockouts, and he's one of the knockout kings in the 135 division. Now he's ranked number 6. Takes on somebody like Adrian Yanez, who's number 12. Now, we got to give Rob Font some credit for this. This is another fight that I got wrong. And you know what? I'm so glad that I got this fight wrong. I'm so glad that I got a lot of these fights wrong because, like I said, this is what you want in combat sports. Do you really want to cover a sport where you know what is going to happen every time? What is the point of that? Like what I was saying earlier in the stream, guys, I was telling you there's a lot of boxing fights that a lot of guys are covering today. But it's almost like, what's the point? You know that Shakur Stevenson was going to win. You knew that Jared Anderson was going to win. It was almost like watching professional wrestling. Whereas tonight, what you really saw was the true theater of the unknown. So, what more is there to say about that? But what's next with Israel Adesanya? Look, I don't think it's really appropriate to really talk about what's next. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, yes, there's a possibility of all these other big matchups going on, right? Do you want to throw Khamzat in there? Yes, but let's leave Khamzat alone because guess what? Khamzat is out enjoying his Ramadan right now. He's probably praying Tarawih right now as we speak, or probably somewhere ready to break his fast, or I'm sorry, ready to start his fast early in the morning. And yes, he may know about this fight. Maybe he cares. Maybe he doesn't. The point is, it's not his night. It doesn't matter. This is all about Israel Adesanya and what he was able to prove to the world. But how ironic, right? Donald Trump was also in the crowd because against all odds, if you really think about it, a lot of people didn't really think that this guy was going to become president. Now, can you connect that in the same similar fashion? Sure. But the other thing that you can connect to this is that people who believe in themselves, other people are not going to believe in you because they're only going to believe what they know and what they see. Look, all the predictions that I had going on tonight, I'm glad that I got them wrong. You want to know why? Because here's the thing. The reality is that I can only look at what I see other fighters do in their past and what they've done in their habits throughout all their careers and then try to correlate that to what may happen in the fight. But the reality is, in the night of the fight, these guys know exactly what they are made of and what they're going to do. And that's not something that I'm going to know if that is I know them personally or I know what went on in their camp. Only they know themselves. So they have to go out there and prove it. We as fans and as analysts and everything else in between, all that we can do in reality is just guess. And sometimes that guess isn't good enough because that guess does not equate to the fighting human spirit that lives inside a person that we just cannot measure at any metric. So that is one of the most beautiful things about this sport. Steve Garcia tonight, right? He beats Ashaya Lin. Again, that's another one that I got wrong. Well, I mean, he had, a body kick that he threw at Shai, which wasn't really a body. It was more like a toe-pointing front kick, very similar to what Conor McGregor does in the early stages of his 145-pound career. And then he follows it up with a body shot. Then he goes down and grounds and pounds him. I mean, it was great. It was awesome. It was great to see. But once again, this is why it's one of the greatest sports ever. And by the way, speaking of great fights, they inducted Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald Part 2 as a Hall of Fame in the fight wing. The fight that happened in UFC 189. Right? That was the same fight where Chad Mendes and Conor McGregor fought in the main event, and Rory McDonald and Robbie Lawler were the co-main event. So it's amazing that in the present time right now, you have all these great fights and all these awesome events going on, but at the same time, they have this history to where they're still able to commemorate and honor the past. And with Israel Adesanya, no doubt, it doesn't matter what's going to happen for the rest of his career. This is going to go down as one of his best moments. Now, you look at Tyron Woodley, right? You've seen how the ending of his career went. Okay, fair enough. But there are some moments that Tyron Woodley had that you're just never going to be able to take away from his career. For example, he had that fight with Damian Maia where, yes, it was boring to a lot of the casual fans because they didn't understand what was going on. But then he also had fights like with Wonder Boy where he went to a draw and then he went to a decision against him afterwards. But then He went on to fight Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman grinds him out to a decision, becomes the undisputed champion, and then goes downhill from there. Right? But those great moments that he's had, you're never going to forget, even after the fact. Now, the same thing with Roy Jones Jr. As you guys know, Roy Jones fought Anthony Pettis in the boxing event last week of none other than Jorge Masvidal's promotion. Now, let's face it, a lot of the boxing guys were saying that Roy Jones had schooled Anthony Pettis. Look, he looked sharp for a 54-year-old, but at the same time, let's be honest, Anthony Pettis schooled him. That's just what we saw. That's just the understanding of reality, and that's just what the judges saw that night, regardless of the fact that they were from Milwaukee and it was placed in Anthony Pettis' hometown. But nonetheless, we're never going to forget the time that he was able to defeat John Ruiz. So you could look at all the knockouts that he's had against Seth Petrozelli, where he got brutally KO'd, all the other losses that he's had prior to that against Joe Calzaghe. Bottom line, we're never going to forget that moment. And the same thing with Muhammad Ali. His career didn't end too epically as well. But we're never going to forget Rumble in a Jungle or Thrilla in Manila. Just like whatever happens to Israel Adesanya later down his career, we're never going to forget UFC 287, where he was able to vindicate himself in the way that he did. So, what else is there really to say about this entire card of epical proportions? Nothing much, other than the fact that I could just say, hey, welcome to the theater of the unknown. Because in the theater of the unknown, you're never going to know what's going to happen, and you never know how these fights are going to go. By the way, I have never been so happy my entire life to get a majority of the entire card wrong. Because in reality, that's what mixed martial arts is all about. Now, hey, if you place bets on all my predictions, I'm sorry to tell you, I'm not here to encourage you to place bets. As a matter of fact, I wish gambling wasn't even legal at all. Now, I understand it's just something that is a means of making money to other people. Okay, fair enough. I'm just not going to participate in it. But predictions are a fun thing to look at because, hey, there's some stakes to it. But then again, not really, because I'm just giving you predictions for no reason other than just the analysis of what I think a fight is going to be or how it's going to look. So, what about Alex Pereira? What comes next with him? Well, there's always the heavier weight classes, and there's always all these other things that are going to come about. But nonetheless, what happens with Israel Adesanya after this, I could only imagine that his fights are going to get even bigger, especially if he's going to fight someone like Khamzat. Now, I know I said we're not going to bring up any future events or this and that, but what else is there really to bring up with any of these fights now that we've witnessed these epical proportions of fights after fights, and then it's just going to continue to roll on. And then next week you have Max Holloway taking on Arnold Allen live in Kansas City. And then after that you have Plavovich taking on Blades in a 5-round heavyweight main event. And then you have Sarukian taking on Moicano. And then, of course, in May 6th in New Jersey, you're going to have Sterling taking on Cejudo. By the way, I believe that's where Shakur Stevenson fought tonight. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, it was a great night of fights, and I would not have had it any other way. Now, does it look bad on my channel that I got a lot of the fights wrong or I got the predictions wrong? Of course. But if you look at the past predictions that I made in other cards, I would say about maybe 80% of them I got correct. But what about the other 20%? Well, that's why they call it the theater of the unknown, right? Again, we can only predict what we think we're going to see. It's ultimately up to these guys that are stepping in there to prove us wrong, and a lot of them did. But that's the beauty of the sport. That's why they call it the theater of the unknown, because you never know what's going to happen. And all I can say to that is thank you to the entire cast of UFC 287 and the fight that you guys put on together, and the UFC and Dana White and the event that you were able to present to the world. I can only hope that this can continue on later down the road. And by the way, to all my fellow Muslim brothers out there, Ramadan Kareem, and enjoy your night. Get some prayers in, get some sleep, get some water, and get ready for the next day, because just like Ramadan and just like prayer and just like your everyday life, it's on to the next one. And just like this sport, it's always on to the next one. So, good night and enjoy yourselves. Thank you.